Hello, young scholars. I'm Professor Sagewell, and today we're diving into one of the most important and often misunderstood chapters in American history. What was the Civil War really about? Was it just a battle between the North and South? Was it about states' rights, or was there something deeper going on? Let's step back in time. The year is 1861. The United States is no longer united. The country is split, and war is about to begin. But why? Let's find out. First, let's set the stage. In the early 1800s, America was growing fast. New states were joining the Union. New cities were being built, and Americans were heading west, looking for land and opportunity. But as the country expanded, an old argument kept popping up. Should slavery be allowed in these new places? Some people said yes, others said no. The country was becoming divided, not just by geography, but by ideas. The northern states were becoming more industrial. They had factories, railroads, and growing cities. Many people in the north wanted slavery to end, or at least stop spreading. The southern states were different. Their economy was based on farming, especially cotton. And those farms, called plantations, used enslaved people to do most of the work. To the south, slavery was seen as necessary to their way of life. As you can imagine, these two sides disagreed a lot. And over time, the disagreement grew into something dangerous. Let's talk more about slavery, because it was the central issue. Sometimes people say the Civil War was about states' rights. That's partly true, but it leaves out something very important. The right that southern states were most worried about was the right to own enslaved people. In the South, millions of African Americans were enslaved. They had no freedom. They could be bought and sold like property. They could be separated from their families. And they were often forced to work long, brutal hours with no pay. Many Northerners believed slavery was wrong and wanted it abolished. But Southerners believed any threat to slavery was a threat to their economy and their power. This disagreement wasn't just political, it was moral. It was about human rights. So when people say the Civil War was about states' rights, you should ask, the right to do what? That is why slavery was at the heart of the conflict. Now let's look at what finally pushed the country over the edge. It all came to a boiling point in the year 1860. That was a presidential election year, and the man who won was Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was from the North. He was a member of the new Republican Party, and most importantly, he wanted to stop the spread of slavery into new territories. Now, Lincoln didn't say he would abolish slavery everywhere. But Southern leaders didn't trust him. They believed his presidency was a threat to their way of life. So even before he took office, Southern states began to act. One by one, starting with South Carolina, Southern states began to secede. That means to leave from the United States. They said they were forming a new country. They called it the Confederate States of America. They even chose their own president, Jefferson Davis. They created their own government and army. They were ready to stand apart from the Union, by force if needed. But the US government didn't recognize the Confederacy as a real country. Lincoln believed that secession was illegal and dangerous. He wanted to hold the country together. The stage was now set for war. The first shots of the Civil War were fired on April 12, 1861. It happened at a place called Fort Sumter in South Carolina. Confederate forces attacked the fort, which was held by Union troops. The Union soldiers eventually surrendered. And just like that, the Civil War had begun. At first, many people thought the war would be short, but they were wrong. It would last for 4 long years and become one of the deadliest conflicts in American history. The war would test the strength of the nation, challenge its values, and ultimately decide what kind of country the United States would be. United or divided, free or enslaved. Those were the questions at the heart of the Civil War. The Civil War was full of major battles, brave soldiers, and heartbreaking losses. Hundreds of thousands of Americans fought, and many died on both sides. One of the bloodiest battles was at Gettysburg in 1863. More than 50,000 soldiers were killed or wounded in just 3 days. It was a turning point in the war and in the nation's story. But not all of the war was fought on the battlefield. Much of it was fought with words, ideas, and laws. One of the most important moments happened on January 1st, 1863. That's when President Lincoln issued something called the Emancipation Proclamation. This was a special order that said, all enslaved people in the Confederate States were now free. It didn't end slavery everywhere, but it changed the purpose of the war. Now the war wasn't just about saving the Union, it was also about ending slavery. Lincoln hoped the Emancipation Proclamation would also keep countries like Britain and France from helping the South. And it worked. They stayed out of the war. It also allowed African Americans to join the Union Army Corps, and over 180,000 did. Their bravery made a powerful statement. They weren't just fighting for the Union, they were fighting for freedom. One of the most famous speeches in American history came during this time. It's called the Gettysburg Address. President Lincoln gave this speech just a few months after the battle at Gettysburg. It was short, only about 2 minutes long, but it carried a huge message. He said that the war was a test of whether a nation built on the idea of liberty and equality could survive. He reminded Americans that all men are created equal, and he asked them to keep fighting so that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. That speech helped people see what was truly at stake. The Civil War wasn't just a fight over land or law. It was a fight over the very soul of the nation. By 1865, after 4 years of brutal war, the Confederacy was running out of men, supplies, and hope. Union forces, led by generals like Ulysses S. Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman, had made major gains. The South was crumbling. Finally, on April 9, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant at a place called Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The war was over. More than 600,000 Americans had died. Families were torn apart. Cities were destroyed. But the Union was preserved, and slavery was coming to an end. Just months later, the 13th Amendment was added to the Constitution. It made slavery illegal in all of the United States. After centuries of injustice, millions of enslaved people were now legally free. Of course, freedom wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Even after slavery was abolished, African Americans still faced unfair treatment, violence, and laws that tried to keep them from voting or owning property. But the Civil War had changed the country forever. It showed that the idea of liberty for all was worth fighting for, and that even when a country is divided, it can work to become whole again. President Lincoln called it a new birth of freedom, and that's what the Civil War was really about. Now let's see what you remember. Here's your quick quiz. Question 1. What was the main cause of the Civil War? Answer: the central cause was a conflict over the future of slavery, especially whether it would expand into new territories. Question 2. Which US president issued the Emancipation Proclamation? Answer: President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Question 3. What was the name of the new country formed by the southern states? Answer: they called it the Confederate States of America. Question 4. What did the 13th Amendment do? Answer: the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in all of the United States. Thank you for joining me on this important journey through history. The Civil War was a time of pain, courage, and change. And understanding what it was really about helps us understand the country we live in today. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep seeking truth, and never stop learning. I'm Professor Sagewell, and class is dismissed.